A woman, alone on the road. But no one knew the two quiet shadows in the back seat were trained K9s. They underestimated her. Until the dogs heard the command. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting red light through the massive truck's windshield, Elena's eyes weren't on the road. They were on the mirror. Despite everything, she was still on alert. The hum of the engine was the only steady melody in her years of quiet travels. Two special steel crates were bolted beside the steering wheel, one for Rex, the other for Shadow. Both black, their military tags still unremoved. Elena was never alone on this road. She never had been. That's what 6 years with the K9 unit had taught her. Real loyalty doesn't come from orders. It stands up silently when danger approaches. The small rest stop she planned to pull into that evening looked ordinary from a distance. 2 gas pumps, a small shop, and a few trucks scattered around. But Elena never ignored her instincts. Even as her foot pressed the brake, her eyes didn't leave the mirror. 2 motorcycles, then 3, then another. Laughter, loud chuckles, and a silence that sounded like a threat mixed with the roar of engines. She knew these kinds of men. She had seen them in uniform, and she'd seen them in civilian clothes. Some wore helmets. Others didn't bother to hide their intentions. As the handbrake clicked into place, Rex's ears perked up. Shadow was already at the crate door, muscles tight, nose sniffing the air. Elena slowly opened the door and stepped out. As her black boots hit the ground, a bit of dust rose, and the biker's laughter briefly stopped. The miles she had worn down didn't slow her steps. They only made them quieter. "Hey there, sweetheart. Is this beast yours?" one of them called out. His leather jacket barely contained the tattoos on his arms. Another tossed his cigarette and stepped on it. "Or did you borrow it from your daddy?" Elena didn't answer. Her eyes went straight to Shadow's crate. With a silent hand motion, she opened the door. The dog stepped out slowly. Rex waited for the second wave, like a true soldier on duty. Silent, steady, and deadly. The bikers started approaching slowly. Their hands were in their pockets now. Maybe no weapons. Maybe they'd just attack with words. Or maybe more than that. But it didn't matter. Elena took a step back and stood between her dogs. "This isn't a good idea," she said calmly, her voice sharp. The guys laughed. "You gonna sick your dogs on us?" "What are they, pets or stuffed toys?" one asked. Another leaned down and looked into Shadow's eyes. "I bet even his teeth are shaking." And then it happened. Elena said just 2 words. "Be ready." The dog's fur bristled. Rex stepped forward, breathing fast. Shadow bared his teeth, still unmoving. The men cut their laughter short. Their instincts told them the fun was over. The lead biker took one more step toward her. He reached his hand out, like he was about to grab something. But this time, Elena didn't wait. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Protect." Shadow lunged like a shadow set loose from chains. In seconds, he was right in front of the man. Teeth out, fur up, every breath from his mouth a warning. Rex was more controlled, but just as close, almost brushing the guy's knees. Their stance made weapons unnecessary. The bikers' faces changed. No one was laughing now. Hands went up. Okay. Call them off." Elena took one more step. "I just want to move on," she said. "But if you ever think of getting close again, you'll see what these boys are really trained for." Silence. Then steps back. Then engines starting up again. They left in a cloud of dust and gasoline. Elena turned to her dogs. "Good job, boys." Shadow's eyes were narrowed, still on alert. Rex looked like he'd stand guard until dawn. But Elena knew. This was just the first step. There was another danger on the road. It wasn't over yet. And sometimes, the real threat doesn't show up in the first encounter. It comes back in the dark. The roar of the engines had faded into the horizon, but the alarm inside Elena hadn't stopped ringing. When she got back behind the wheel, her eyes didn't leave the rearview mirror. Rex sat in the passenger seat, scanning the outside through the glass. Shadow stayed in his crate in the back, holding position without flinching. They weren't just companions. They were the only beings she could fully trust in a fight. Elena had lived through situations like this many times on the road, but this time felt different. Her instincts were whispering, this wasn't over yet. Headlights on, gear in drive. The massive 18-wheeler rolled forward again. As the road line slid by beneath her, Elena's mind was still caught in what had just happened. The bikers had backed off too fast. They didn't seem like the kind of men who'd give up that easily. Those looks, they were signs. Maybe they were just waiting. For less crowd, less light, fewer witnesses. Half an hour later, she spotted a rest stop lit with yellow neon signs up ahead and let out a deep breath. Her gut was still uneasy, but the dogs needed a break. She parked the truck between some other rigs. The spot looked relatively safe, at least on the surface. The moment she pulled the parking brake, Shadow let out a low growl. Then Rex leaned closer to the windshield, scanning the area. Elena said nothing but glanced at the mirror for lights behind them. All at the same height, same distance. Motorcycle headlights. "They're back," she whispered to herself. Her voice was barely audible, but Shadow's ears perked up. Rex growled, pressing closer to the glass. This time it wasn't just harassment, it was going to be a test. Elena slowly stepped out of the cab. She wasn't carrying a weapon, but she didn't need one. She carefully let Rex out. The dog took his stance the moment his paws hit the ground. 2 seconds later, Shadow joined him. Elena's chest rose, her breathing heavy. Somewhere deep inside, like back in her old missions, adrenaline surged through her veins. Funny how the real battlefield could sometimes show up in the simplest places. As the bikes pulled into the lot, the same men appeared again. Leading them was the bearded guy who'd spoken earlier. This time, he was carrying a metal chain. Another had a knife strapped to his belt. They weren't smiling. They were walking straight toward Elena. "You embarrassed us," the bearded one said. "We're not here to talk. We're here to settle things." Without taking her eyes off him, Elena spoke in a calm, clear voice. "I didn't hurt you. I just drew a line. If you choose to cross it, you deal with the consequences." "You still trust those dogs," one of them said from behind. "But this time, we came prepared." Then one of them suddenly moved, circling around the truck and reaching fast for Elena's arm. But this wasn't just a physical move, it was a miscalculation. Because Rex had already stepped in. He didn't attack. He simply blocked the guy's path and nudged Elena aside with his head. Shadow had already taken position behind. If someone tried to come from the rear, he'd stop them. The men froze for a second. The bearded one holding the chain stepped forward hesitantly, but then paused, taking in Elena's resolve, the discipline of the dogs, and the stillness of the night. "You can't buy loyalty like that," one of them sneered. "But fear, everyone's got that." Elena took a deep breath and reached into her jacket pocket. She pulled out a small whistle. One sharp blow, high-pitched but short. It was the signal for the dog's defensive stance. Rex lunged forward. Shadow came around the truck. Together, they formed a wall between the bikers and Elena. Teeth bared, muscles tense, eyes locked. These weren't pets anymore. These were working dogs. If there was a threat, they wouldn't wait to act. For the first time, the bikers' faces changed. The cocky grins were gone. One guy's voice cracked. "You're crazy." "No," Elena replied. "I'm just not alone." Two of them started backing off. One ran toward his bike, the others followed. The one with the chain gave one last look, a mix of rage, humiliation, and fear. Engines revved. This time, they left faster. And this time, Elena felt they weren't coming back. She turned to her dogs, placing a hand on each of their heads. Mission accomplished. But deep down, she knew this was only a physical victory. The real fight would come from somewhere much deeper. That night, the inside of the truck was silent, but it wasn't a lonely silence. Elena had taken off her boots and climbed into the bed area in the back of the small but tidy cabin. Shadow was curled up at her feet, ears laid back. Rex was stretched out beside her, eyes still open, watching the dark. As Elena ran her fingers along the dog's neck, she held her breath, as if silently searching for a trace of the past. She closed her eyes, but even in the dark, those faces were still there. The military base from years ago. The days when she led the unit. The dusty grounds where she trained with the K9 team. Missions where orders, loyalty, and death were all tangled together. When she first met Rex and Shadow, both were traumatized. Rex had lost his team during a bomb detection mission. Shadow had been rescued from illegal fighting rings and retrained. It was Elena's quiet that transformed their rage. Commands weren't shouted, they were trusted. And these dogs never obeyed anyone they didn't trust. Elena took a deep breath. The red veins under her eyelids stood out even more. She knew she wasn't going to sleep. Because she was starting to sense that these attacks weren't just some random thugs, they were signs of something more organized, something in the shadows. Before the sun was even up, she decided to hit the road. A few other truckers were still parked nearby, but none of them could look her in the eye. Maybe the screams from the night before, or the image of the dogs in full defense mode, were still stuck in their minds. Or maybe there was just something about Elena, something you couldn't name, but you could feel. She wasn't just a female driver. Her presence told a story, one quietly whispered along the road, but never spoken out loud. As the truck tore through the asphalt, Rex sat upright in the front seat. Shadow was in his crate, but you could tell how alert he was by the way he balanced himself with every turn. Elena didn't turn on the radio. She didn't want the news. She didn't need music. For her, silence was like an old friend. Sometimes a shield, sometimes a sword. She had picked her second stop off-route on a dirt path a few miles from the main road, surrounded by shaded trees, a place that usually stayed quiet. Back in the military, they'd used a similar spot as a fallback zone, perfect for clearing her head. When she parked the truck, Rex got out first. He scanned the area. Then Shadow jumped down from the cab. They stood side by side. Elena pulled an old military field box from the cargo hold. Inside were an unmarked radio, a few first aid kits, spare leashes, and an envelope. That envelope had been sealed for years. Because what was inside wasn't just dangerous to her, it was dangerous to anyone watching her. But now, she could feel that her past was catching up, just like the road. Were the bikers a sign? Or just a coincidence? Or maybe someone was still tracking her? She didn't open the envelope. But the moment she held it in her hand, both dogs turned to her. Rex gave a soft whine. Shadow's ears stood up. Elena looked away. "Not yet," she said. Just then, the screen on the radio flashed red. A signal from the old base frequency. That channel had been silent for years, and now it was sending a code. And only a handful of people knew that code. The dogs didn't bark. But in that moment, every cell in Elena's body lit up like an alarm. Because now, the threat wasn't coming from outside anymore, it was coming from within. Elena placed the envelope back into the field box, but she knew she was getting close to a point of no return. The radio blinked red 3 more times. For seconds between each blink. That couldn't be a coincidence. It was a call. The rhythm of the code belonged to an old encryption system used only during special missions, either to cancel an active operation or signal an operative in danger. Elena dropped to her knees and pressed the edge of the radio. Old habits didn't fade easily. The icon on the screen flickered, and then a line of text appeared. F-263. The Shadow has been reborn. F-263. That codename belonged to only one person, Luca, the only survivor from her old unit, officially declared dead. Luca, quiet, lethal, and led by conscience. When Elena thought he'd truly died, it was the first time she stopped questioning her own safety. If Luca was back, it meant the past wasn't just a ghost. It had become a physical threat. Just then, she heard a rustle among the trees behind the truck. Rex jumped to his feet, fully in attack stance. Shadow's eyes locked onto a point in the darkness. Elena moved to the back of the truck and pressed her back to the metal surface. She raised her hand, then slowly lowered it. Protection stance. The 2 K9s spread out, moving slowly to each side. Now Elena stood in the middle, but that didn't mean she was alone. It meant she was exactly where the trap needed to be baited. Someone stepped out from the bushes. Black jacket, clean-shaven face, a gray beanie on his head. No weapon in hand. But Elena had learned unarmed men were often more dangerous. The man raised his hands as he approached, his steps slow but firm. "If you don't call Rex off, I'll have to hurt him," he said in a low voice. There was something familiar in his tone. She had heard that voice before, deep in desert sands years ago. "Luca," said Elena, "you were dead. To me, yes. But as long as you're alive, I never really died." With that strange sentence, a chain of memories began forming in Elena's mind. Luca had been injured during a mission, disappeared during a Black Ops operation. Elena had suspected he'd gone off the grid somehow. Still, there had been no signal, no trace. Until now. "Why did you find me?" Elena asked. Her voice held no anger, only sharp curiosity. "Because the ones after you don't know your past," Luca said. "But I do. They think they're just targeting some female truck driver. But you're the last piece of our unit. And if they get to you, the codes, the maps, the operations, they all collapse. We need to stop them before they get to you." Elena stepped forward. "Who are they?" "The guys pretending to be bikers." Luca nodded. "No, the bikers are just a front. The real power is behind the ones funding them. Our old enemies, they're organized now. And you being alive is messing with their plans. Just then, the radio crackled again. This time, a new signal. Target made contact with F-263. Location identified. Luca's face darkened. They're watching us, he said. Without turning around, Elena gave the command, ready. Rex and Shadow moved in sync, taking position behind the truck. This time, the danger wasn't a loud threat, it was a trap creeping in silently. There was no engine sound, but Elena knew these enemies didn't come with dust. They came with silence. So this isn't just my road anymore, Elena said quietly. If they've targeted us, then the fight just crossed the truck's doors. Luca pulled a small chip from his pocket. This chip holds the location of their main base. If we can get there, maybe we can stay one step ahead. Elena took the chip and looked up at the sky. Even the stars seemed to be silent. Because some nights aren't about the journey. They're about the war. When Elena inserted the chip she got from Luca into the hidden slot beneath the dashboard, the old system inside the truck activated instantly. A map appeared on the display, an isolated area off-route, only accessible by truck paths, seemingly an abandoned loading zone. But when Elena squinted and tapped the symbol in the corner of the map, it suddenly changed, a fork icon inside a black box. According to her old codes, this meant a dormant base, penetrable, but high risk. Luca stayed silent. That was his way. He didn't answer questions, he moved when the time was right. But things were different with Elena's dogs. They didn't understand silence. They followed eyes, breath, heartbeat. Rex was in the front seat, one paw pressed to the window, watching the outside. Shadow was in the back, listening to every bump. Every muscle, every posture was on alert. By the time they hit the road, the sun had already gone down. Elena was behind the wheel, Luca in the passenger seat, eyes constantly scanning. For them, this wasn't a drive. It was an infiltration. In the back of the truck, Luca had stashed a box of hidden gear. Inside were sound-dampening fabrics, camo vests for the K9s, and an old model scope. Nothing about this was casual. What about the people inside? Elena asked. Are they expecting us? Luca nodded. Not yet. But the moment that chip was activated, we started being tracked. We have to reach them first. Half an hour later, they arrived at what looked like an abandoned loading area. The concrete ground was cracked. Rusty containers were stacked around. But Elena never trusted surface appearances. Places like this were silent graveyards where information and human trafficking were hidden away. As the truck rolled slowly into the dark, Rex perked up his ears. Shadow's nose twitched slightly. They didn't listen for sounds. They listened for scents, vibrations, hesitation. What's the plan? Elena asked. Luca moved to the back and pulled out the vests. Rex and Shadow recognized the gear immediately. During their most intense training periods, those vests taught them one thing. This wasn't play. This was a mission. I'll infiltrate, Luca said. You stay in the truck. If things go sideways, make sure they don't leave you. Elena smiled. If they already assumed that was the plan, they've already lost. As Luca disappeared into the container stacks in full camo, Elena opened the truck door. She removed the dog's leashes. They were in mission mode now. Elena saw that look again, something very few ever witnessed. A command glowing in their pupils, unspoken. Just then, something moved in the darkness and caught Elena's attention. About 50 meters from the truck, among the containers, a shadow shifted. But it wasn't human-shaped. It was crouched, crawling, creeping closer. Rex growled. Shadow didn't even bark, he just turned sharply toward the movement. Elena dropped to her knees and looked in that direction. Then, her eyes narrowed. It was a child. Yes, a boy around 12 years old. Dirty, clothes torn. His eyes were wide with fear. Help me. Please, he whispered. Elena's mind exploded. This wasn't just a depot. There were people being held inside. Hostages. Maybe kids. Maybe individuals with old military intel. Luca, she said into the radio. Change of plan. You're not alone in there. Hostages confirmed. Luca's voice crackled through, high but clear. Understood. Moving fast. But things moved even faster. Headlights burst from behind the containers. Four black SUVs entered the area at once. The boy couldn't run. Rex and Shadow immediately jumped in front of him, shielding him. They tucked him under the truck. Elena pulled the child inside as Rex turned toward the approaching vehicles. Wait, Elena said. Wait. But Rex wouldn't wait. He wasn't a guard. He was a shield, a front line. And now, that gleam in his eyes reminded Elena of one thing. Loyalty is tested most when fear arrives. Shadow slowly crept out from under the truck. Elena gave one command: protection protocol. Hostage secured. And then, silence exploded. Lights, gunfire, screaming. Luca's voice cracked over the radio. They've opened fire inside. Elena moved to the driver's seat. She started the truck. This wasn't an escape, it was a counterstrike. As the headlights sliced through the dark, both Shadow and Rex were already in position. What they faced wasn't just bullets, it was purpose. Because tonight, it wasn't the road being traveled. It was history being written. The truck's engine roared like a battle anthem cutting through the heart of the night. As Elena turned the wheel, her eyes weren't on the rearview mirror, they were locked on what lay ahead. Because this time, she wasn't running, she was charging forward. The headlights sliced through the shadows between the containers, and Rex leapt to the front of the vehicle, running in line with the tire, using his body like armor. Shadow held the rear, his eyes and ears scanning in every direction. Their training wasn't for now, it was for this exact moment. When the truck screeched to a halt, Elena flung the door open. She pulled the boy into the rear cabin and locked it, all while trying to catch Luca's voice on the radio. "What's your position?" she asked, calm but quick. The answer took a few seconds. Then came the sound of gunfire, shouting, digital interference, and a strained breath. "I've breached the main building. At least 7 inside. But there are more. If I reach the servers, we can expose everything." Elena narrowed her eyes. "You have 10 minutes. We'll create a distraction with Rex and Shadow." She looked at the dogs. There was no hesitation in their eyes. Only waiting energy, a hunger for the mission, and unshakable loyalty. "Showtime," said Elena. "Let's shine a light on the shadows." Shadow moved first. He crawled under the truck, silently slipping behind the containers and neutralizing 2 guards almost invisibly. This wasn't an attack, it was a silent hunt. Then Rex, following Elena's signal, launched forward. As he passed between 2 SUVs, he dropped 2 men by their legs before they could react. Their weapons clattered to the ground. Screams cut through the air. That drew out more men from inside. These weren't ordinary biker imitators. They all wore the same uniforms, earpieces, weapons drawn. Their eyes turned toward Elena. But Elena wasn't alone. She quickly ducked behind a container and activated a compact EMP device. It would jam local signals, cutting their comms. And it worked. The men started yelling. "Comms down. Something's wrong." Right then, a blast echoed from the building. Light burst from the windows. Then Luca's voice crackled over the radio. "Servers destroyed. Data copied before deletion. I'm on my way, but getting out wouldn't be easy." One man approached Elena, holding a silenced gun. Elena had no weapon, but she had heart. As the man aimed, Rex lunged. His teeth clamped onto the man's wrist, bringing him down with a scream. Shadow pounced on him, applying pressure to his head. Elena looked him straight in the eyes. "I trained these dogs, and you never gave them the respect they earned." Luca emerged from the building, carrying a small disc. "It's done," he said. "This disc holds who they are, who they work with, and what they've done. They won't escape this." But just then, one of the SUVs fired up again. Inside was their leader, the bearded man who first harassed Elena. As he sped off, he shouted, "This isn't over. It'll never be over." But he forgot one thing. The truck was still there, and Elena was still behind the wheel. Elena gave one last look to the dogs. Down, Rex and Shadow dropped to the ground. Elena jumped into the cab, fired up the engine. The SUV was charging fast, but Elena's vehicle was bigger, stronger, more determined. The crash was brutal. The SUV launched into the air, slammed down onto the concrete. The man inside didn't move. Silence fell. Luca stepped closer. "There's something I need to tell you." Elena climbed out of the truck, the steering wheel's vibration still in her hands, Rex's breath still in her ear. Luca went on, "I didn't just come to protect you. If they hadn't found you, they would have come for me. But you became the center of this war because they still couldn't forgive you for not being afraid." Elena nodded. "I wasn't afraid, because I was never alone." Rex and Shadow quietly approached, resting their heads against her legs. And in that moment, Elena understood. At the end of the road, it's not weapons that protect you, it's loyalty. And sometimes, the deadliest defense walks on 4 paws.